Let's talk about the First Amendment and what we're seeing on college campuses across the country. So there's a tremendous amount of confusion about what is protected speech and what is not protected speech. So I'm going to talk about a few different categories. First of all, there is speech that is not protected, meaning if the government punishes you for engaging in that speech, it doesn't matter because it's not protected speech, so it's not protected by the First Amendment. Then there is speech and expressive conduct that is protected by the First Amendment. So that means that if the government punishes you from engaging in protective speech or expressive conduct, protected expressive conduct, then the government has violated your fundamental rights. Then there is non-state action, meaning you have a private institution and they are not governed by the First Amendment at all. So private universities, private colleges, just like private employers, corporations, they are not bound by the First Amendment, but they are bound by their own codes of conduct. And if they receive federal funding, I'm talking about universities here, if universities receive federal funding, then they are bound by civil rights law. So federal law, not the Constitution, but federal law. So let's talk about those basically three different categories and where we see the protests on campus and what categories they fall into. So if we're talking about, let's start with a public institution, a university that is a state school. A state school is bound by the First Amendment because they are the government, basically, and they cannot violate the First Amendment rights of their students. So those students have First Amendment rights to engage in protest. And a lot of protest is protected. So there are some types of speech that students can engage in that are no longer protected. And that would include harassment, speech that is harassment. It would include fighting words, and it would include speech that incites imminent, unlawful conduct. So those are all categories of speech that are not protected by the First Amendment, regardless of whether it's on a college campus or not. So if you have students who are engaging in harassment against other students, or if you have professors who are engaging in harassment of students on campus, that is not protected speech. That is not protected expressive conduct. And in fact, the university should punish it, not just because it's not protected by the First Amendment, but because if they allow that to continue, they are probably now violating civil rights law, and they're putting their own federal funding at risk. So that's one piece of this. Another piece is that there is speech, of course, that is protected, and universities need to do everything that they can to ensure that students are able to engage in peaceful protest and express their views consistent with the First Amendment. But even First Amendment protected speech can be subject to reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions, meaning a university can say, okay, you can protest during these hours, or you cannot protest during final exams, or during a college graduation. They can place reasonable time, place, manner restrictions on protests so that they are able to run the university in a way that benefits the students and fulfills the mission of the university. And it seems like universities across the country are not enforcing reasonable time, place, manner restrictions against these protests, which is really problematic because at the end of the day, it's leading to this harassing, fighting words type behavior and speech that is not protected and that is also violating the civil rights of the Jewish students on campus.